Hi folks, Frank Lamb here from the Automation Academy, and this is a Mastering the Machine webinar for the 5th of November 2021. Our guest today was John Whitten from Projects of Things, and he talked about project management and setting expectations for projects, and talked about some of the different types of projects that people do. Hope you enjoy it. This is the Mastering the Machine webinar for the 5th of November 2021. I do these every 2 weeks for the Automation Academy. So Mastering the Machine is named after a document that I put out back in 2013 about building machinery. And at that time, I was straight out of a machine builder. And I talked a lot about what it takes to plan and document a machine build, which is related to our topic today. So that's where the name came from. And this is part of the Automation Academy, which has evolved into a training and automation website where I talk mostly about system integration. And here is the website. People join this, they become members, and there are a lot of downloadable files, training videos. I was heavily concentrated on PLCs for a while, but now I'm moving into a lot of other things that I get involved in, like our last couple of webinars have been on industrial Internet of Things and Raspberry Pis and microcontrollers and things like that. But we talk about a lot of different things here. So there is a library of training and technical documents, and there is a community on there, kind of like a LinkedIn or a Facebook for the small community that we have. And we do have regular events, which is what this is all about. Anyway, we do have regular events like this webinar. That's what this is all about. We do this every 2 weeks. Our guest today is John Whitten, and I met John on LinkedIn after talking back and forth on a particular post, and found out that John was into project management, and he is a principal at Projects of Things, which is an independent consultancy founded to help project teams start smoother and finish sooner. And there is a website associated with this. John will probably fill you in on that. It is, I believe, projectsofthings.something. So John can fill you in on exactly what that is. I see somebody's joined us. Hello, Scott. So broad interest in projects and programs related to capital projects, industrial automation. And he is a certified project management professional, which is a certification that you get, a PMP, and there are some other certifications. Possibly John will fill us in on what those are. I have dealt with project managers in my past, but I am not one, so I don't know some of the certifications and things that you need to get. But I'm really eager to see what John has to say about that. I always thought of project management as spreadsheets and Gantt charts and budgets and things like that. But obviously there's a lot more to it. So some of the things that I found on John's website and his presentation on LinkedIn were these, which were interesting. These brought up a lot of projects I hadn't thought about. I've been involved in capital projects most of my life, but I have also done some of my own pilot or prototype projects. I'm involved in one right now, and we had a guest on last week that was doing a prototype. So from John's perspective, project managers and the project team often have a challenge in setting expectations. There are few projects that have expectations of innovation and technology that are automatic, and that goes without saying, right? Nothing does itself. All have a level of risk or effort. As a matter of fact, in my experience, all of our projects were late. Every single one that I've ever worked on for a large machine builder was late. It wasn't always the machine builder's fault, right? It was there were engineering changes and things that made it extend beyond the original deadline, and maybe that was acceptable to the customer. But I'm sure John will talk a lot about that. So I have never been involved with a project that was completely on time. So very interesting. And with that, I'm going to introduce John. How are you doing this morning, John?
Hey, thanks, Frank. Appreciate the introduction. Yeah, we're doing well. Unlike my background, I'm here in north of Atlanta, and we're just now getting to be fall, and so it's a good chance to kind of get together. And be glad to share what I have today and follow up with other people this year or make plans for next year if people have interest there. Let me go ahead and share my screen real quick.
Okay, there's a little turnover here. Let's see, advanced sharing options. Make sure that everybody can share. Unfortunately, I don't have the way to just say one person can share, but if you're sharing, until you shut it, it will work. You should be able to share. There we go.
All right, great. So I kind of titled this as Setting Expectations in IoT and Industrial Automation. It is about projects, but it's also about some specifics of technology. So hopefully that will be helpful to this audience. I think there'll be some general things and maybe some specific things to take out. So the best way to connect with me is on LinkedIn. You're welcome to join me that way. I try to post regularly. I connect with others, and I'm also happy to make introductions. So if you see someone in my 5,000 connections you'd like an introduction to, let me know. We'll be glad to do that. So I'm an open connector in that way. I guess there's never enough of us to share and learn. Again, I kind of, as a founder, I kind of focus in two areas. I kind of have not too schizophrenic, but sometimes I consult on projects and programs, and other times I consult on innovation and technology. And this kind of pulls both of those aspects together. I'm a degreed engineer. I've been a certified project management professional, managed over 100 projects for large automation project companies, Siemens, Metso, ABB, and like. I've done everything from condition monitoring to control systems to burner management systems, plant line systems, enterprise systems, a huge variety of things. And so I'm also active in the community. I founded the Greater Atlanta Internet of Things. We meet once a month here locally in Atlanta. Right now, everything's virtually. I'm also part of the National Society of Automation, and I've done some things with some other local groups. So my agenda today was just try to talk through 5 general topics, and I'll try to pause as we go through these. I do kind of go through this pretty quick, so if I need to slow down, let me know. If you're looking at this on a recording, of course, you can adjust the speed as well. So the 5 topics I really like to talk about is where are we with today's technology? Kind of how do you go about, what are the things about setting expectations agreements? Then I have in my framework 7 types of projects, 3 types of journeys, and kind of some general things that you can do as you kind of assess and maybe accelerate your journey. So today's technology, traditionally people like to look at it as either hardware versus software. That's blown out the window, right? That really doesn't mean anything anymore. That's really not the way we want to try to look at it. It doesn't really tell us much. There's firmware, there's hardware, there's software and everything. It's really that framework doesn't seem to work for us. There are those that also believe that perhaps maybe it's a matter of technology that will survive. And so you look at embedded technology and say, oh, well, Internet of Things will swallow embedded technology. No, operation technology will swallow that, or IT will swallow that. It's kind of there is this view that maybe only one will survive, and I would say that's probably not the case. What we're probably going to see is we're going to continue to see things evolve and blur in a variety of ways. There's a lot of different names for the technology, and I think it's fragmenting rather than coming together. I have a hard time agreeing that information technology is one technology, or there's one group that's involved with that. That's kind of it becomes, at some point, it all becomes blurred together. So these are some of the technologies that I think are kind of blurring together and creating some of this churn that we see in how people label the stuff and how they identify with who they are. I think that emphasis may be important from a marketing standpoint, but I think that blur just kind of really creates a lot of confusion, and maybe it creates some misunderstandings. So my strategy is to try to say, well, what is the real framework? What are the really dimensions that we need to look at? And so to my view, there's 5. A solution architecture needs to look at the instrumentation, the infrastructure, the integration of that data together, the intelligence, and the interfaces. So I think in a broad swath of kind of how this all fits together, I think there's really 5 different aspects that need to be held as you look at these kinds of technologies. In short, instrumentation is related to the devices. Obviously, those are peripherals to sense and monitor and control assets. You have the domains, which are all types of networks of connectivity and device management. You have integration, where you talk about data storage and processing, whether it's in the cloud or on the premise. And then you have intelligence, which to me is converting that data to decisions, whether it's through rules, logic, or algorithms. And then, of course, you have interfaces where you have those displays and visualizations, to provide notification, escalation, and decision making. So to me, those are the elements that are there. Again, we could break these down into a lot more detail. We can talk about where things fit, but these really are a broad topical area, and it's not just one technology. So again, these things continue to evolve. There's some things that are new, there's some things that are old, and you'll just have to kind of see what's right for your solution and for your opportunity as you go through. Again, I don't want to spend a lot of time with each one of these because they all mean some things together, but I think if you look at how you can group these things together, I think that's maybe helpful. But what I really want to do is talk about how you set expectations with these different things. Obviously, it's easy sometimes to interpret the same thing in different ways. If I told you this is a young lady, you may say, no, it's actually an old lady. And so sometimes we look at the same things, we may interpret it differently, we may not see things in the same way, so you really have to get agreement. And the way to do that is to kind of give clues or highlights of things that are clear, right? So in this case, you can see it's more clear that it's the young lady and it leads to that. In this, you may see from this end, it's the older lady and it's still the same picture. So kind of talking through those, sharing the clues, sharing terminology kind of helps bring you to seeing the same thing. One of the things that we have to agree on is that we have different expectations, and probably some of us have different superpowers than others. So I think it's important to kind of look at who is on the team and make sure that you kind of have agreement amongst everybody what their expectations and superpowers are. Some people do that through kickoff meetings, some people do it through documents, some people do it through other ways of getting together. But I think it's important that you realize at an onset that we all come at it from a different perspective. And so there may be some inherent challenges as we do that. The other thing that we find is that we have unrealistic expectations. And so the three things that we need to kind of work toward is trust, transparency, and tempo. These are things that we need to try to be able to agree on as we work as a team, right? So trust is not something that happens overnight. It's built over consistency in both saying what we're going to do and being able to go there. So if you don't have that, then you're going to erode trust. Transparency is not just saying how do you subjectively feel about something. It's trying to look more objectively and being fair about where things stand and where you are with your efforts. Tempo is kind of the rate of setting and fulfilling expectations. And you can see that for a lot of people, these are areas that are different: the level of trust, the level of transparency, and the level of tempo. And so those are things as a group you kind of need to talk through some of those themes and issues. I think another thing to agree is that there's always limits of our planning versus reality. I think we all have known that it's not what we plan to do, it's what we actually end up doing that really governs our projects and our success. So if you create a plan that hides the reality, then you're likely to create a lot more problems than if you kind of accept and talk through the reality. One way to do that is to talk lessons learned at the beginning of a project and saying, what's been the good, the bad, and the ugly of projects that we've done, and kind of talk that out so you can kind of move toward a common reality. So each of you kind of see where each other have been. It's also kind of take an objective look at things. The other thing that you have to agree is on the approach to talent. And I think this is an area that's significantly important. There's kind of this mythology of a solo inventor that's sitting in his basement that's creating everything by himself. And that maybe is cute for Hollywood and for movies, but it just doesn't happen that way. More often than not, if you have a team approach, you'll always overpower an individual that's working on his own. And so you need to make sure you find the right leverage on that. Talent costs money, talent creates complexity, talent creates some other challenges. So you need to kind of make sure you agree on how you want to approach that. There's also the importance to agree on the extent of planning. And so there's more than one way that you can do planning. One way is to say, let's just plan and finish one project at a time. And that's kind of saying, let's be serial. Let's only keep our head down and do one thing at a time. Other people say, oh, everything is iterative. We have to make progress. Then let's do it again. Then let's do it again. Okay, well, there is some of that's involved. Some people look at sequentially where they say, let's plan more than one step, even though we finish one at a time. Other people say, let's plan so we more than one thing, and maybe we can finish more than one thing in parallel. So that's another thing of the extent of planning that you really have to have agreement on. And then I would say we have to agree, typically, based on the technology space, that all projects incorporate some iteration. It would be nice to say everything is once through, but that's just not the reality of how technology is done. Oftentimes when you think of art, even, we think of art as where someone is inspired, they create a painting and then they display it. But then when you go back to the art studio, you see they have 10 versions of that same picture in their studio where they built toward the one that you finally see. So I think we need to get beyond that myth that everything is going to be a once through. You will have to repeat as needed. That's just the nature of what we're doing. But I do think you also have to agree on the response to requirements. So of course, the general things are, is it waterfall? Is it agile? Is it a hybrid? What are kind of, how do you respond to requirements? And so one of the things that waterfall kind of and the phase gate approach typically says is you must meet certain requirements to move on. So those kind of become hurdles or gates or things that kind of move you forward. Agile in the most general way says, well, we can trade what works for whatever, for the stated requirements. Kind of at its heart, it says we can make it up as we go along, or we can change it if it's too hard. Now, most efforts are hybrid. There's some things you can change and some things you can't. There are probably some things that are more preferences. And so I would say don't get too distracted in the methodology of saying whether you're waterfall or agile. I think I would say automatically accept that you're taking a hybrid response and say, what are the requirements that we must meet and which are what the requirements that are soft and that we can adapt as we move on. So I think really just approach it as hybrid. Don't get too caught up in your methodology, so you'll just kind of have a philosophical argument rather than moving forward. I think the other thing that's important on project methodologies is that you typically want to talk more about sprints than steps, right? So if you're someone that says they like to count how many steps they make every day, did you do 5,000 steps this week? Did you do 10,000 steps this week? I think you're kind of too much into the weeds. So you want to try to say, what are the things that we got done? What are the results? What are the activities that we've done? And you kind of want to, as a sprint, kind of limit your work in progress incrementally to those things. Don't try to do everything at once. Try to do it in a cluster. Try to do it in driven based on both the team capabilities and the commitments that you have there. I guess I would also want you to remind you that a lot of what we do in the technology and projects, the work is really much more like a triathlon than a marathon. We're really not doing the same thing over and over again. What we're finding is that we may swim for a while, then we're going to run for a while, then we're going to bike for a while. And that change of activities, that change of projects is really where we have to try to manage that. And so don't just see it as a begin and end, see how you need to change as you go through that product development. So are there any questions about that? Any questions about the methodologies and some of those agreements that we need to have?
Looks like Lavelle's here also. Lavelle attends pretty regularly. Hello, Lavelle. Any questions from either of you guys? The triathlon, I have a comment about that. It seems like, yeah, people talk about things being like a marathon or a sprint or whatever, but what I've found is, for instance, in machine design, you're in the design phase for a while. Everything's kind of paper and just design. And then all of a sudden the machine's built. It's time to power it up. It's time to debug it. You get it all ready to go. And then you ship it and you do SATs and FATs and all those sort of things. And then there's some customer care and documentation and things like that. So they really are different activities in that case. Now, I notice you've got, paper projects, and I don't even know what some of these are. You're going to talk about these later. Persona projects, different kinds of projects probably have different things, right, that are involved in them. It's not all capital projects like I've worked on, but
Yeah.
Lavelle says hi. It looks like they're not on mic, but so I did see that in the chat.
So let's kind of focus in a little bit on what are those different things that we have to do to make things successful. And so I've kind of created 7 types, and I think it helps to agree what type of project you're going to do. Now, the ideal case for a lot of people is that everything is a production project, right? They always want to think, we got a clear go ahead on the spend, the clock has started, any mistakes have a high multiplier. We've got to do everything at scale. Everybody says, go, 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 we're ready for production. I agree that those are the great projects and they're the great place to be. It's just you're not always there. You can't always just jump in and you're immediately at a production project. Well, some people say, well, let's just do a pilot. Let's do a pilot before we do the production. And I kind of have to say, well, what do we mean by a pilot project? Typically, a pilot project says the scene shifts from the lab to the wild, right? So you're not going in this clean environment. But a pilot project inherently means that the driver, it has to be the customer or a stand-in for the customer. And so what you find is you're not ready yet to have the customer do things because, and so maybe a pilot project is something you're not ready for. You also need to make sure that the pilot is something where you qualified the customer so that you know that the customer is the right person to help you move your project and technology focused. And the result of a pilot project always should be that you're trying to reach a decision or acceptance. This isn't a show and tell activity where you're trying to get likes or appreciation or have somebody clap you or say you did a nice job. A pilot project always has to be driven to say, how can I get someone to make a decision or to accept our technology? So if you're not gearing a pilot to saying, how do I make sure that we get that acceptance of the technology, then you're really not focusing on the right things for a pilot project. If you have expected, if your clients are new customers, you're going to have a different type of pilot project than you're going to have if they're existing. So I think you really need to, when you think of a pilot project, you certainly want to do that before you go into production, but you don't want to think that pilot projects are really where you're spending a lot of time doing development. So really, where you're trying to demonstrate the main idea is in a prototype project. That's where you rarely focus on the cost or manufacturability. You accept that it can differ from the final form. You may even include it in simulation, maybe provide some other functions that are there. The reality is a prototype project is just kind of a temporary thing, right? So it won't always survive. It won't always be something that will be useful or something that you can turn over to a customer, but it is something that you do that helps you evolve your definition and understanding of how things work. One thing about a prototype project is that it typically moves toward having the full functionality that's needed for the pilot. Now, what you may want to find out is that sometimes people try to do too much in their prototype projects before they go to a pilot, and you may need to find that that's an iterative process. There is an idea where you want your prototype to do the minimal viable product features. That means you want to do the least features that are needed for the customer to accept your solution. This isn't a beauty contest. You're not trying to do as much as you can. You're trying to do the least you can that satisfies the customer and then incrementally add to that until you reach that minimal viable product that they'll accept. So one of the things about prototypes is that they can be hard to try to fit everything together and do everything. So one thing we recommend people to also look at is sometimes you want to do what's considered a proof of concept project. And what that may be something is that you take something existing and you hack it with a notable difference, or it may be that you're just showing how a particular function or idea can be realized. It's kind of where you're focusing on the first focus. What some people make a mistake on a proof of concept is they focus on things that are based on the state of the practice or what's easily done. And that's usually a waste of money and time. When you're doing a proof of concept, you want to focus on the hard part of the project. What are the hard things that you have to develop, innovate on, create capability for? That proof of concept, it really has to focus on that. You don't have the time, you don't have the resources, you don't have the bandwidth to do everything later in the prototype until you kind of create some proof of concept that's going to really create the core value that you're going to move forward with in your products. If you're in a startup or you're a company and you want to create value, if you're going to create intellectual property, that proof of concept has to be focused on things that are original and novel. If all you're doing is creating things that are kind of in the state of practice, then you don't necessarily need to go to the proof of concept. Just don't confuse yourself in saying that you think you're creating intellectual property if you're just doing state of the practice. So one of the things about working together on a project is how do you get started? And that can be hard to say. How do you get started when you're in an individual and it's a new technology area? Or how can you get started working together on a team? And so sometimes I recommend that teams or individuals look at doing a practice project. That means do something that's not original, not do something that only do it in a quick way, in an accelerated way that kind of proves your competency, improves your learning, creates your collaboration. There's a lot of places where you can see where you get a development kit from a manufacturer, where you can go to Instructables or some other websites where people share what they have done. Sometimes there's value in the team as well as in an individual basis to say, this is just a practice project. I know I'm not going to set the world on fire, but I feel like if I do this, it's going to accelerate my learning as I go into the other things. So if it is a practice project, if it's something that's being driven by your learning, just characterize it as that way. Make sure everybody knows that that's what it's done, and try to use that in a way to say, how can we divide this up in a way that each person can have a part in that, or somebody knows what they're expecting. Now, if you have a practice project that takes forever to do, that's not a good thing either. So you won't make a lot of money for these. Sometimes you have to do these for free. You can't always charge for it, but it is something that kind of helps everyone agree and see things together. The persona project is something that's a little different in that it's really a project that focuses not on the technology itself, but the people that are going to use the technology. So this kind of focuses on things like empathy, what is their pain, what is the purpose. It kind of creates focuses on the detail of not what the technology is, but how someone would use that. So if you're making technology for a control room operator, make sure you know what it's like to be a control room operator. If you're making it for someone that's out in the field, standing in the rain, trying to monitor something or get something back and working, make sure that you look at that you understand that person and what their pain points are and how things work together. There's a lot of ways to draw those personas. Sometimes there'll be more than one persona for the same product. You may have an expert user versus an inexperienced user, but it's kind of helpful to know where people are coming from, know what their existing technology is, know what their pain points are, kind of know why they want this kind of thing. And sometimes that gets misunderstood. and people create a lot more complexity than they need to, and then that hurts them. So I remember when I worked in R&D, one of my first things my supervisor said, you know, we design products for high school and college and community college educated people to use. There may be PhDs in R&D, and the problem they have is they design things for PhDs people to use. And so again, make sure that you know who you're designing for. You don't overcomplicate that. And then finally, the paper project is probably the least expensive at all. And that's a project where you create a design of an outline project. You can obviously do skip implementation details. You can focus on a block or functional diagram. You're really focusing on illustration over composition. For example, you may make a schematic or a circuit, but you don't necessarily have to get into the part numbers. You know, you may not have to get into the brands, but you need to have a one-page block diagram of how is this going to work. You need to have an outline or a flow chart. And this is another type of project that you need to kind of focus on. So again, these projects kind of get bundled together where you can take one project, you can bundle several projects together under a program, you can bundle different things together on a portfolio. From my standpoint, I look at each one of these as a project themselves. Any comments or questions about those 7 types of projects?
No, I think I'm good. I learned a lot here. I never even knew the names of some of these persona projects. Certainly a new one for me, but I understand the concept behind it. Neat. So
in a general way, I really look at these as 3 journeys. So there's a discovery journey, a development journey, and a delivery journey. And so it may be one of those things where you can get close to the agreement on a journey, and then you come back and kind of fine tune the projects together. For example, on the discovery journey, you may start with a paper project, go to a persona project, do a practice project, and then do a proof of concept project. So you may bundle all of that together as kind of your discovery journey. You may actually get into prototype projects as part of that, but that's kind of where you want to come together and decide with them, you know, how you're going to bundle those projects if you're in a discovery mode. You may be in a development journey where you say, let's focus only on prototype projects, pilots, and again, focusing on that minimal viable product. That's a different type of journey than the discovery journey, but you know, that may be where you would be and where you would see where you'd be with a client. A delivery journey typically includes both pilot projects, and then you kind of have to do a deeper dive on what does that production project really need to deliver. If you're just creating a solution that delivers to a warehouse, there's one expectation. If you're delivering to an integrator or a services provider, delivering direct to site, or if you're in a service model where you're doing continuous delivery, all those kind of create different types of production projects. So I won't say there's one type of product, but try to make sure you understand that and think of the delivery journey. So those, if you look at those 3 different journeys together, I think that's typically where you can agree, and then you can kind of break it down into where you are. The best way to do that is to do an assessment and try to accelerate your journeys. Are there any questions about this idea of bundling these projects together as a journey, or is that pretty clear?
I think it's pretty clear. Yeah.
So one thing that happens is you may find that you do one and then you have to go back and do the other one again, right? So if you run into a proof of concept and things don't work, you may have to retreat and start back over again. And that's where you want to make sure people are clear on where you stand and what you're doing so that there's a full agreement. So my feeling is that you really want to do an assessment by looking again at the types of projects that we're doing. And you kind of want to do an assessment along each of those dimensions. Where are we with instrumentation? Where are we with our interfaces? Where are we? What are we expecting for infrastructure, the integration, and the intelligence? And kind of score, are we at the more, is that closer to a discovery journey or the development journey or the delivery journey? let's kind of see where we are. I mean, ideally, everybody would like to be mature where everything is just a delivery journey, but that's just not realistic. So what you find is that if you say, oh, I want to do it discovery on everything, then all of a sudden you suddenly found that you filled the page, right? So now you have 15 projects or 15 things you need to work on, which really becomes overwhelming. So what you can do sometimes is you can find accelerators, right, that kind of help move you from one place to the other. You can look to fill in the gaps to move faster. Maybe you want to reduce the support you need. Maybe you want to minimize your capital, or you want to look for a multiplier scale. And you can do that by looking at other products, partners, or platforms. And so when you do that, then you can say, okay, maybe we're going to focus on this case we'll do instrumentation discovery, and we'll do development of the instrumentation and interfaces, but we're not going to get involved into the infrastructure, the integration intelligence until we're really more into the delivery phase. Other cases, you may say, no, let's focus only on instrumentation that's off the shelf. Let's use some canned system for the interfaces, and let's focus on discovery and development, maybe only of the intelligence, of the logic, or maybe only of the data and how you pull that together. So I would say as a framework, as an assessment, you kind of want to look at each of these and make sure that you're clear and setting expectations of where you are. So both you know where you are and everyone else knows where you are as you move forward on that journey. So I know I covered a lot in a short amount of time, and there's no really, one way of doing it. It's just my opinion that, having a common terminology, talking through these things kind of helps everyone to make a successful project.
Very interesting. A lot to digest. a lot of terms there. A lot of this, it looks like, is focused on creating an end product that you're going to repeat, like a commercial product, or something that is very repeatable rather than a one-off.
Yeah, I think that's where I think that's where everyone wants to build in reusability.
Right. So my background is capital projects.
When you're doing 10,000, you have to rely on reusability. And so what are the areas that you can reuse and what are the ones you can't? I think I think if you can crack that nut, you can be more successful.
So my background, again, is more custom machinery. Now, what I've run into is sometimes we build one machine and then it turns out, oh, they want two more exactly like it. And the intent when we did the one machine was it was going to be a one-off. And so things weren't necessarily documented well, and they weren't designed in such a way that you could repeat it, right? So then you end up kind of almost going back to the drawing board and saying, well, we're reinventing some of the things that we should have documented in the first place, right? At least for large machinery. I know it's differently, like if I used to work with a packaging machine builder, and when he started, he was doing one-offs. And then all of a sudden he realized, oh, these baggers, these vertical baggers work really well. I want to commercialize this. I want to make this something that I can produce, hundreds of at a time or whatever. And it was a whole different thing. He had to go all the way back to the drawing board, right? And think about commercializing things. So you've provided a lot of information here about doing that kind of thing, commercializing products. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where my background is in power plants and utilities. And so everyone can say, well, all the power plants are the same. They all create power. I'd say, well, some of the components are the same, but what you really have found is that it's rare that one is completely identical to the others. How they do cooling, how they do fuel, how they operate the processes. It is difficult to create that economy of scale. IoT, of course, on the other end says, how can you look at things at a hyperscale, right? So they're going to say, for example, you may try to build things at the power of 3 or 30 or 300 or 3,000 or 30,000 and incrementally move to scale. But I would say if you're only building to the power of 1, you're going to continue to face pressures of cost to build plus the cost to support. And so I would say right now, everyone has to move to a higher number of scale to really find that their business is going to be successful. And you need to be able to get into that where you're continuing to do delivery and you're doing less discovery and less, development, to be successful.
Right. So custom machine building just tends to be the one-off thing. But my guest last week, one of them was a fellow named Michael O'Day, and he's a member here at the Automation Academy. And he talked a little bit about his project, which ultimately down the road, he needs 2,000 of something. And we've talked about here, what it takes to, start. You mentioned doing 3 of something and then multiplying it to 30 and then going to 300 and 3,000 of something. So we're at the, we're actually building 5 prototypes because they want to install one. And he's already been playing with one that was, as you said, these 5 are a little different than the first one. And now, when you mentioned that you may end up even changing your platform, you said that the prototype has the functionality, but it may even use different products or a different base. Well, we're facing that because, as I've mentioned to you offline, it was based on the Raspberry Pi, which was the one with the headers and all this, and we've chosen products that interface with those headers. And it's turning out you can't get the Raspberry Pis, and there are other products like the computes. And the computes, they're saying they're going to concentrate on those, and they're going to make maybe thousands of those, but you may not see thousands of the Raspberry Pi 4s anymore. So all of a sudden, their base may have to be different. But one of the things he said last week is he is dedicated to using Node-RED for it. So his program is already pretty much transferable to another platform. It's going to be JavaScript, Node-RED, using the technology with the modem that he mentioned last week. He has access to guaranteed that he can get 2,000 of the specific modem that he's chosen, but his base platform may very well end up changing. So going through these stages and doing pilots and prototypes and proof of concepts is going to be very important from their standpoint. So hopefully he'll see this this webinar. I'm sure he'll look at it since it's posted on the Automation Academy site, and of course on YouTube for anybody who wants to look at it later and hopefully absorb some of this, because these are challenges, right? When you have to do a lot of something, if you do the first one or the first 3 or the first 30 wrong, that propagates forward into when you do the 300 or 3,000 of them. So,
right.
Yeah,
I think it's one of those things with every project, right? That if things aren't going to work, you want to find out sooner than later. And so you find out before you've committed, too much to a technology. So
exactly. Any questions from Lavelle? Or I noticed Med has joined, and we had Scott here. I don't know if Scott's still hanging around. Any questions from anybody? Comments, questions?
I got no questions. Thanks. This is very insightful.
Yeah, I think so too. I've learned a ton. As I mentioned, I always thought of project managers, they were the guys with the custom machinery that, focused on the Gantt chart and made sure we were on schedule. But we were doing a one-off, and we most of the time knew we were doing a one-off, even if down the road we have to build another one, right? And like I said, hopefully you're documenting things as you went along. I do have I'm going to go ahead and share screens here, and we have some other things we can talk about in terms of the questions and things. Here's some pictures from John's website and from his LinkedIn profile. He actually posted some very good blog posts related to these subjects. So some of these were related to project management, I guess, and he kind of expounded on the different uses, you know, to I guess to a hammer. If you have a hammer, everything's a nail. That's a common one, or the use of wrenches. He's really got some interesting things. So thanks for the questions that have been there. Of course, I've had most of the questions, but any other comments, questions? Or John, do you want to expound on any of these? These are some great blog posts that you had.
Well, I guess what I would just say is, you know, I think it's it's important that that we kind of step out of the basement view, if you will, where we kind of think that to innovate, we have to go do it on ourselves, you know, go down in the basement and come back with the solution. Again, I really think that there's a mythology there about that I think really creates unrealistic expectations of ourselves as well as our teams. And so I would say, you know, the degree that people participate in things like Automation Academy and kind of a networking group or people where they can share where they are and what they're working on. I just think that's an important thing for both our own health and satisfaction, but I also think it helps the overall technology as well. So from my standpoint as a project, you know, I think let's look more as what we can do together as a team and help each other and work together because it's really not, the technology has gotten so to such a point. It's going to be rare that any one of us can be, if you will, be a master of everything. So.
Agreed there. So I have a concept for you. What do you do when somebody comes to you and gives you I guess a box that you have to put things into? So they come to you and they say, here's what we want to create. By the way, we're forced by time constraints that this absolutely has to be done by June. Okay. But you realize when you look at it that, hey, we've got all these different types of projects involved in this. We have to do a pilot. We have to do a proof of concept. By the time they even get the parts together, right, and find out that some of these parts aren't even available, right? We're having shipping problems and things like that now. You can't even get that. How do you manage the expectations of the customer when they say, our constraint for this box is that this has to be working by 6 months from now?
Yeah, so it all comes back to why. You know, why did they come up with that time that they think it can be done then? Is this something that they're playing a competitive game and they want to say, well, you know, I believe if I give you a fixed date that you're gonna get done faster than you otherwise would, and if I don't give you a fixed date, you're going to you know, you're going to take too long with it. You know, is there a real reason for that, or are there other reasons that it's a real reason? And so I think you want to make sure that it's a real reason, and then you have to say, well, let's do a plan to do that, and say, if we're going to be on track to do this by June, then this is where we need to be in February, this is where we need to be in March, and this is where we need to be, and you need to set up a goals, you know, that will kind of get you there. Typically, what I would say is the best thing to do when you have an unrealistic schedule is to change the scope. And so take the things that are high risk that are in the discovery area or things that are in the development area and try to find substitutes for those, to try to find ways to accelerate based on those things that move you back into kind of that delivery journey and not in the discovery journey. So that may be one of those things where you've got to separate the like to have versus the must haves. And so that may mean that instead of someone wanting to take an approach where they do things in code, okay, you're going to have to do a node red, for example, or you may have to buy someone else's product rather than doing something, and creating your own from scratch. So the trade-off, there's some trade-offs on that, but you definitely would want to say, what can we do to at least to that minimal viable product? What's the absolute least that they need to go in January? And if those other things are still important in the nice to haves, then let's say, let's go to the minimum viable now, and then later we can set you on a roadmap to get those others at the next time or the next opportunity.
Okay. Yeah. One case I had of that, and it's been almost 10 years now, but Kimberly Clark came to the company that I worked for, and they said, our patent expires on this date. And at that time, all the other companies are going to start making what we make now. So we have to have a new product. And they probably should have thought about that, years before that, but it was too late. It was, I think, a year from when the patent expired. So there was their hard deadline. Now, in the case of Michael, which we talked about, so this is open information yesterday, he said one of the things that drives his project is that in February, there's the possibility that 3G for cell phones goes away. So their existing product, which uses 3G, I think 1/3 of them will not have the capability to communicate. So they have to replace it with something. And I don't know if there's somebody else that has something they can drop in place of it. I think probably they do, but they, for other reasons, they want to have their own product, which is what's driving this somewhat. And they probably will have a minimum viable product. That's probably exactly what they'll have by February, is something that works, but is not necessarily the final solution.
Well, what some people may say is, okay, how do you, rather than having the infrastructure incorporated into the device, say, let's look at our infrastructure where we use an off-the-shelf router. And so then you say, how can I make my device so it will work with the router, and let that router adjust to whatever technology it needs to be, whether it's 3G, 5G, Wi-Fi, et cetera, and try to take that out of the product and use other products that are there, rather than trying to build new infrastructure technology into a discovery that's going to delay the project that way.
Yeah. Okay. So some of the other, I'm still showing this picture that you have here. And of course, with the paintbrushes, one of my comments, when I read that, I was expecting to see, don't save your old paintbrushes somewhere in there, which I tend to do. Sometimes I go out to my garage and I see used paintbrushes that I soaked in thinner and sort of work, but they're not the right brush for the task. You had mentioned in your blog post that, make sure you use the soft brushes with the thin paint and the bigger brushes for the thick paint and things like that. So I saw a little different result than I thought. This was poking fun at me. Don't reuse your your used brushes.
I'm not going to make any comments in my old brushes as well.
So I would encourage everybody to visit John's website and connect with him on LinkedIn. Look at some of the posts. They were very enlightening, I think. For instance, I knew that somewhere in your blog post with the axe that you would have something about having an axe to grind. So that was a good one. Yeah. And so any questions, comments?
Again, I'm glad to connect with people on LinkedIn. You can just look for John A. Whitten as one word in the search. I think it'll pop up that way. Or I think Frank has that. LinkedIn's really the #1 way I do that. And so I try to work with people in the way that they're working with their customers. So sometimes I'll just work on a retention basis where it's just a fixed amount every month just for advice and counsel and conversation. Other cases, it's a fixed scope, or maybe it's a workshop, or sometimes it's just trying to say, how do you get the team together to kind of talk through these things together? And sometimes I try to enable and facilitate that. I also have my share of prototype projects that I've done over the years. And if you want to buy any of those, let me know. I don't know that they work that well, but I've got it's one of those things I've collected more junk than I need. So I'll be glad to make my junk your treasure if you want to buy some prototypes.
Excellent. So, and again, John's in the Atlanta area, so you can possibly hook up with him there. And then looks like LaBelle. Thanks, John. Frank, it's been a treat. So at this point, I think I'm going to, let's see, move on to the next slide, which is basically, it is coming up toward the end of the hour here. Our next webinar is November 19th, and the guest and the topic is going to be PLC Next. And the guest, it really depends, right? There are two possible people that are going to show up from Phoenix. But Phoenix Contact is the maker of PLC Next, and it's an IoT capable PLC. So they're going to be doing some demonstrations on that. So hopefully that will be useful to some people. So John, what are your prototypes built in, the ones that you're saying are available if somebody wants to get a hold of one?
Oh, they can contact me. I'll be glad to share some details on that.
Okay. But okay. So, well, anyway, I encourage everyone to connect with John on LinkedIn. John's very active there. If you can't find his profile, you may already be connected with me, and I'll be happy to pass it along. And it was great talking to you, John, and hope to talk to you some more.
Sounds great. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thank you.